Welcome back to another episode of On the Subject. I'm your host, Michael Vilardo, co-founder and CEO of Subject.com. You know where to find us. And we have a really special episode today. We're highlighting the most innovative educators throughout the United States. We're going all over the country. We're bringing the podcast on tour. We've done Michigan, New Mexico, and now we are in San Diego, California, highlighting the incredible Leo Perez, Associate Superintendent at Shasta. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Super excited to be able to learn more about your journey in education. One, we always like expressing gratitude. Thank you so much for all the students you've impacted over the course of your career and how many better citizens, friends, wives, husbands you've made. It's really important and we really appreciate it. Why did you want to get into education? What drew you to it?
It was very interesting because I started out in a completely different trajectory. And when I was in grad school, I started teaching a biology class. It was a lab. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And it started me rethinking what I might want to consider as a career path, because my original was going to go into biotech and do all these other things. And when you start teaching kids, well, young adults at this point, it was very satisfying and gratifying. And I went down that path. It wasn't planned at all, but sometimes the best things in life, they're serendipitous and you end up in a spot. And I always tell people I have no regrets about what I've done because I had certainly different goals, but I look at the impact of how it just impacted so many different people in so many different ways. Like you don't realize it's a calling until you're in it sometimes, I guess would be a way to describe it.
Is there a specific teacher or coach who made you want to think about it more?
I've had that question come up quite a few times, and I reflect back, and probably one of my most impactful instructors was actually when I was at a community college, and there was a chemistry instructor, and her name was Dr. Deb Ryan.
Shout out Dr. Deb Ryan.
Yes. And so it really just got me thinking, and she was very inspirational in terms of just, hey, you can do a lot. I came from a very small school. So
where did you come from?
So it was school's Butte Valley High School in Dorris, California.
Is that where Aaron Rodgers was?
No, Aaron Rodgers is in Chico.
Okay. He went to Duke Community College, right?
He did. So
is that the same one you went to?
I went to College of the Siskiyous.
That's amazing.
That's in Weed, California, which is famous for a lot of things, including their T-shirts. But went to a small school, had a graduating class of 15. That's a 1.5.
15, wow.
15.
Okay, so you had 60 kids in the school.
Yeah, no, we're pushing right about 120, and just again, senior class.
Yeah.
But anyway, being in a rural school, you don't always have role models as to what you can do. And so when I took Dr. Ryan's class, she was very inspirational and very motivational. Hey, you could do a lot. You're very capable. You're very bright. And just hearing that from someone like her was very motivational. So it really inspired me, because when I got to college, there's a lot of things I did know because of coming from a small environment. I didn't know what AP was, and it's like, because that stuff. And so having someone like that at that early stage was very pivotal in what I did.
I love that we share in common. We're both community college alums. I think it's an incredible path. Mm-hmm. Why do you think more young people are going to trade school or community colleges? How can we help break down the stigma, and what a great path it can be?
I think part of it is just that they need to see I think we need to work on helping them find what their passion is.
Yes.
And I think that's really the big value of CTE in high schools, is that they get an opportunity to explore careers. And there's two pathways that they can learn in this. I either love it or I don't love it.
Yeah, and that's just as valuable.
That is equally important, because sometimes you hear we got to get these kids involved. So they need to know what they want to do or not want to do. And so I'm a huge proponent of CTE. I'm also a big proponent of, we still need to prepare you for college, because if you change your mind down the road, or you get into a job through CTE, but then you want to have vertical movement, it's probably going to involve higher education at some level. And so I do believe that our kids should be prepared for every option throughout their career, not just, if you're going to go to the workforce, let's just pigeonhole you in these areas and deny you certain opportunities.
Yeah, let's double click on this, because I love this perspective. And I think college has gotten a little bit of a bad rap from a lot of people over the last couple of decades. I'm still a big believer in higher ed. I definitely acknowledge some higher eds aren't doing the best job, but getting an incredible degree from some great schools, it is worth its weight in gold. And I really still stand by that all the way. I love that you put the perspective of changing your mind. How many times at 25, 30, 35, 40 years old do people change their mind, but they feel they don't have an option? And isn't that the whole point of education, is to constantly provide people with options?
But it definitely is. And as you start looking at the way that our world is changing, and even in the last few years with the AI, you talk about massive mind shift on how we deal with so many things, but also looking at the data says that kids that are graduating from high school now will probably have 3 or 4 different types of careers because of just how things are changing. Yep. If we don't do our job of preparing them to be able to make those changes, what I would hate to see is for a kid who gets stuck in a position because of circumstances, especially if the circumstance is something we control, which is their education. So I think it's critically important that we do those things and really be mindful that we're teaching a lot of things about critical thinking and how to adapt and how to be creative. Those are really probably the most important things that we can teach. And we do it in the vehicle through our educational system of, certainly the core subjects, but also all those electives and, using things like project-based learning and things that allow them to be creative and allows them to flourish. Because when they get into a career situation, I'm sure like you with subject, you're going to value people that are going to think outside the box and say,
Always.
hey, couldn't we not do it this way? And kids might be more receptive to something in a different format than was more traditional. And I think that's where people get stuck. And I want to teach the way I was taught, or I want to do things the way I learned them. But in a very dynamic world that we have now with constant change, we need to get away from that. And sometimes having that new blood like yourself, where you say, let's change things the way we do. And that's
I appreciate that. And yes, innovation all the way. I think one of the most eye-opening stats I've seen, you really call the point to it too, is over 50% of graduating seniors are going to work in a job that doesn't even exist yet.
Correct.
Doesn't even exist yet because the world's changing so much. But you're here because you're so innovative. You're constantly bringing new things to Shasta. How do you evaluate if something's innovative or a smokescreen?
So I'm going to look for a couple of different things, because if you don't have metrics to measure the quality,
Data. It's all about data.
You've got to have some metrics of how is this valuable that you're bringing to your school. So I'm going to evaluate it by one, is it getting used? But also, is it providing a level of learning for our students that transcends the current setting, meaning high school? How is this going to help you 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? Those are the real important pieces. But in terms of metrics, it's going to come back to usage and then engagement. If I'm using a product and the students are engaged and they're learning, and I can measure that, and I have tons of tools to measure that. And we have.
What's most important to you with engagement? What does engagement mean to you and now we're getting more like first principle hypothetical, like to you, when do you believe a student is engaged in a learning environment?
I think they're going to be engaged when they choose to go and pursue that on their own time.
That's a
because if you're doing it because when you're investing your time,
and your own volition.
No, that's what exactly. And when you have that, and I think about if a teacher who has kids in their classroom during breaks, during lunch, after school to work on stuff that we're doing in class, that's powerful because that means that you've engaged them, and then that's we don't really do a metric for that per se.
That's very anecdotal that we could definitely do a better job measuring it. What do you think you'd like to see change the most in the next 15 years? Like, how can we make school even more relevant for these Gen Alpha students?
Yeah, I've had this question come up a few times, but really, we need to shift how we do education. We're still stuck in the brick and mortar model.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, and people are voting or speaking with their feet. Public schools that choose not to adapt. That means we're going to have different ways of delivering education. We're going to have different modes to meet them, to think of a tagline from an old 80s commercial of have it your way. It really is. That's what we have to do. We have to provide that. And I also think about, some people may recall the Borders bookstore.
Oh, yeah. And I used to love going to those growing up.
Oh, no, you had Borders.
They're not even around anymore. Right. Barnes & Noble.
And Barnes & Noble. Yeah. One chose to say, I'm going to be brick and mortar only. And they hung tight to that.
They did.
And one said, we're going to do other things differently. We're going to build the Kindles and do all these other things. Once it exists, it's once it's not. Yep. And I use that example to talk about how is public education going to survive? We are either going to be Borders or we're going to be Barnes & Noble and still be around because we're going to adapt to what the needs of our students are and what they are receptive to. So
to me, you have to say that I can't agree with that more. I think it's so fascinating because you wouldn't most likely ask your kids to go churn butter in the backyard. No. You wouldn't go to a silent movie with them most likely, but so for some reason, some things we still try to hold on to the past so much, and it's okay to lean into change. Change is good. In the history of the world, most people who lean into progression and change usually are looked at more fondly than the ones who try to claim to an older time.
It is. And I think when you look at the struggles across the decades, and
we learn so much from history.
Yeah, and history has taught us over and over, right?
Every time.
You have the rebels, the young kids, and I chuckle at that because I sometimes I feel I'm that old guy in that room sometimes, but at least I think I'm forward-thinking enough to say, you know what, but I have to be open-minded about how we do things. But we've seen it in those eras, okay. The counterculture becomes mainstream eventually.
It does.
And that's what we got to remember is that what we're fighting against right now, and I think about how people reacted to AI 2 years ago, shut it down, why are we allowing it? Now we all use it, and as adults we use it in
Oh, right in their
It worked.
emails. I'm like,
Everything
yeah,
was right.
let's
Somehow,
go.
and we're still dealing with some people who are hesitant to allow it in the classroom. I'm like, no.
They also don't want to. They don't want to allow the calculator either.
Oh,
Remember, there was a lot of uproar
I was
about.
going to. That's going to be one of my reference points. When the graphing calculator came out, people are up in arms, and they're not going to, because we can't. There's so much information in our world that if we decide that you need to learn everything that there is to know which is the model that we're trying to get away from, it's impossible. That's why
That's what the encyclopedias were about. You're right. That's it's like, hey, how can you have as much categorical information in your brain as possible? Because you didn't have the internet to rely upon. But now, for instance, I know about myself. The last time I did a math problem in my head, I can't remember. It's all on now. It's ChatGPT or it's on my iPhone going to the calculator app.
And you're not even typing it anymore. You're just asking.
Yeah. Oh, Siri. Hey, Siri, can you do this for me?
You do. But that's the adapting to the changing world. And as we get further and further along with how we interact with our world, it's going to allow us to really compound our level of knowledge about what we do in all aspects of our lives. But again, it's being open to the innovations that are coming our way. And like you mentioned earlier, there's lots of jobs that don't even exist yet that are going to be necessary. So how do you train for that? You train kids to be innovative, creative, and thoughtful thinkers about adapting to their work.
Yeah, I completely agree. When we always talk in these conversations and we culminate what we're really discussing, I always love to try to give a shout out to either a former student or colleague of yours. And you don't have to name them by any means. Like someone who you really were inspired by and a really fun, heartfelt story for the fans. Any students come to mind?
I do think of a lot of different students that have been amazing and the challenges they've overcome. And I'm not going to name a specific student, I'm going to name a specific class. So when I was a teacher, I taught this class called Applied Science, and it was for special ed students. Yeah, and I ran it as a project-based learning program. And I remember thinking, that was new at the time to education, but thinking about, okay, these kids could not survive in certain elements of a regular classroom, at least thinking, and I think it was a little bit of a closed mindset at the time because I'm like thinking that all kids need to do certain things. Again, probably a second or third year teacher. But watching what those kids did over time and how they grew, and that if you don't put boundaries on them and just say, I'm going to let you expand to your capacity, and it goes back to the concept of all children can learn and all children can hit a standard. You just have to, give them the opportunity. And that means that there needs to be multiple pathways to reaching that standard. And that's why you find that innovation and that creativity in those kids. That year that I had the special ed class, all those kids watching how they did stuff. And then and really the real measures when they came back 5-10 years later, like, hey, Mr. Perez, I still remember when we did blank, because I wasn't grinding on them on, here's a worksheet, here's a whatever. We were doing hands-on stuff that was meaningful to them. It changed the way I taught for the rest of my career before I was in the classroom because of those kids.
That's amazing. Well, I really appreciate everything you've done for kids over there. Even just your intro about how much fulfillment and satisfaction you have with your life, and you have so much ahead of you. You know, I really appreciate the chance to be able to learn from you and how you've been able to approach education. And our whole goal is to continue to lead the way in innovation, to take more chances, help Gen Alpha and Gen Z learn better than ever before. And we can't do it without learning from great people like you. So I really appreciate your time. And where can we find you on social? Where can the fans find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. We will be linking his LinkedIn in the comments down below.
Oh boy.
Spotify and YouTube is where we want you to go. Please click subscribe. And thank you so much for joining us today, Leo. So much fun hanging out with you.
No, I really enjoyed it. And I love speaking to what we've been doing with those students up in the Northern California. Redding, California is a little bit of a forgotten space.
Beautiful place.
It is
right by Mount Shasta. Gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. And just for everyone out there, when they think of Northern California, it is not San Francisco. There are still 6 hours of driving left before you leave California, folks. So.
Agreed. Check out Redding. Check out Shasta. Beautiful places. And you can go hang out with Leo. Incredible educator. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.